Hey, folks, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for Thursday, May 16th, 2019. Attacks on women's reproductive rights are happening across the country, not just in Alabama. Missouri passed their law today as well. The question is, what happens next? We'll break that down on today's show. Civil rights organizations are coming to the aid of Crystal Mason, the black woman jailed for voting in Fort Worth, Texas. We'll talk to her attorney about their appeal case. Senator Kamala Harris makes it perfectly clear Joe Biden can make a great running mate for her as her vice president. Let me show the video. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley takes on so-called black identity extremists. She says it's the FBI's fake excuse for monitoring civil rights groups. Studies have shown that black girls are punished more often and more severely than any other race. We'll talk about why. And Hair Love is a book that teaches children to love themselves and their magical black hair. We'll talk with author Matthew Cherry and illustrator Vashti Harrison. Also, some more crazy-ass white people decided to have Thug Day at school. What the hell are y'all teaching y'all children? And plus, The Intruder is, of course, doing well at the box office, starring Michael Ealy and Megan Good. We'll hear from both of them as well. And we got to have a family conversation in Black Hollywood about y'all hiring non-black publicists who want to ignore black media on the red carpet. Trust me, I got something to say to all of y'all in Black Hollywood. It's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the fine. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. Yeah, it's Uncle Roro, y'all. Yeah, it's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Yesterday, Alabama, today, Missouri, both following in the footsteps of Ohio and Georgia, passing restrictive abortion bills. The question is, what happens next? What they're doing is they want the Supreme Court to weigh in on these cases in a desperate way. The white conservative evangelicals always wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned since it was enacted in 1973, and as a result of these laws, they are hoping the Supreme Court will hear one of these laws and take it up. The question is, what is going to happen legally? Joining us right now is Janice Mathis, Executive Director for the National Council of Negro Women. Also on our panel, we have Dr. Greg Carr, Chair of the Department of Afro-American Studies, Howard University. We also have, of course, Erica Savage-Wilson, host, Savage Politics Podcast, and Mustafa Santiago Ali, former Senior Advisor for the Environmental Justice at the EPA. Janice, I want to go to you. You're a lawyer as well. This is what they have been gearing up for quite some time. I have been telling black people that these battles were happening on the state level. When you saw what took place in 2010 with Democrats losing big on the congressional level, they also lost significant seats on the state level, gubernatorial mansions and state legislatures. Now we're seeing it. We saw ALEC, we saw Stand Your Ground, we saw voter ID bill. But this issue here is one that is tops. And so Alabama, Missouri, Georgia, Ohio, we can expect to see others. They want to force the Supreme Court with 5 conservative justices to strike down Roe v. Wade.
I think you have to go back to really understand this, Roland. Go back to Anthony Kennedy's replacement. Anthony Kennedy was a swing vote. He was the pivot point around.
He was conservative, but
he could pivot.
Moderate, yes.
He could pivot, depending on what the issue was. His appointment of his replacement has now made it 5-4 in the other direction. And if Roberts does not vote to save Roe, it's probably gone. I think, though, it's important to note that maybe Alabama went too far. The law is so extreme that the court may be tempted to, for the reputation of the court's sake, not because they want to save women or save health care,
right,
but because when you start talking about jailing doctors and doctors and physicians who perform abortions can get decades in prison. Now you've gone what we would call in the law overbroad.
Hell, Pat Robertson.
Say you've done too much.
When Pat Robertson says you've gone too far,
Then you've gone too far.
damn. Of all people.
And so we'll just see. Of course, now, there have been other instances where the court was willing to go too far. Bush v. Gore. They went too far then. People, I never shall forget, we were on the phone, smart lawyers telling me, oh no, the Supreme Court will never take that case up because the Supreme Court doesn't decide local election matters. But they decided that one. So it's
And limited their ruling just to that
said
case.
it has no precedential value.
Erica,
we'll see.
Erica, the thing that was interesting about this whole back and forth, if you look at public opinion, a majority of Americans say leave Roe v. Wade where it is. People view this as a personal decision. Yeah. When you look at Alabama, not just jailing doctors, but literally refusing to even have rape or incest included in that. You have people out there, conservatives like Matt Walsh and others, who have been getting blasted on social media saying, how dare you can be for this. I've had people who were criticizing me because I've said, oh, how can you call yourselves pro-life but you support the death penalty? Right. And then, of course, some conservative, they retweeted it. And so all these trolls start coming at me. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm just repeating what the Catholic Church said. But the opinion of the Catholic Church is they are absolutely against abortion, but they're absolutely against the death penalty. Right. And what you have here is you have people who call themselves pro-life, but in fact, they're not pro-life because they got no problem putting folks to death.
Absolutely. And then they absolutely have no problem with oppressing Black and brown people. So the way that we look at it broadly is to say that this is about women's bodies, but then at the same time, who are the people that we are not only electing, but then that we are also funding their campaigns that do stand with those people who really are scared of the browning of America. They do want to have some sense of control over population as well to ensure that the majority that is rising doesn't rise it has been reported to raise. And so for me, I think that this is really an opportunity for everyone to get more involved with state legislators, and then also to understand that though these bills have been passed at the House levels in the states, that they have not been passed overall broadly. So there is still time for people to engage, for people to fund the ACLU and other organizations that are taking these states, that are taking these people to task, that are really trying to take away precedents that's been set for over 40 years now.
Greg Carr, what people don't understand is that Republicans love to talk about small government, getting government out of our lives. But the reality is these are the same people in Alabama who passed a law that says city councils cannot take down Confederate statues. Same thing in North Carolina, same thing in Virginia. And so I call, even on issues like this, my pastor calls it situational ethics. They have situational faith. They have situational values. Where again, it's always, oh no, it's local until we have power, and then we're going to make it perfectly clear that since we have power, we're going to tell y'all what to do.
Yes, the scholar Marimba Ani refers to it as a rhetorical ethic. They just say anything to get what they're after. They're going to push this federal experiment called the United States of America until it finally breaks. That's what's going to happen. John Roberts has a decision to make. I agree with you, Janice. Is there going to be judicial legitimacy for the federal judiciary? Where they've already picked up almost a quarter of all the lower court federal judges in the past 2 years. Is there going to be respect for a federal judiciary nationwide, or are they going to go for this power grab? This is absolutely coordinated. You mentioned ALEC. This is being coordinated. Of course, Alabama's the overreach. They're going to test the outer limits. But we'll know as soon as Monday whether or not they're going to hear the challenge to this Indiana law, which has a couple of troublesome provisions, and you've got one coming up from Louisiana. They'll certainly probably hear this. You only need 4 votes on the court to allow to them to hear a case. They set their own docket. Justice McConnell, also known as Neil Gorsuch, is in a trio with Alito and Clarence Thomas, who said recently that there are 2 bad decisions Roe versus Wade and Dred Scott. So this is about stare decisis as well. This is set law, 50 years. If you attack this, John Roberts is going to have to choose. Either he's going to go with the theocracy of Mike Pence and the other rhetorical ethicists, or they're going to create a situation where this country is going to fraction beyond recognition, because some states you're going to be able to terminate a pregnancy and others you won't. And then you're going to see states saying, you turn that megabus around from Georgia, you're not coming into Virginia to terminate your pregnancy.
Well, in fact, Mustafa, Georgia's law penalizing you if you cross state lines.
Yep.
What you also have here, and I really need people to understand this, which is why so many of our people have got to stop watching mainstream media who refuses to really properly put this in context. This thing goes beyond just the abortion laws. Mm-hmm. You deal with the issue of abortion. You look at voter ID. You look at voter suppression. You look at the attacks on civil rights. Mm-hmm. What you have here, you have a clear design of a political party who knows that they are a largely white party. They know that we are 24 years away from becoming a nation majority people of color. So what they are doing is they are trying to cement, put in place the infrastructure that goes beyond 2043, put in place the infrastructure that will keep them at the levers of power for an additional 20 to 30 years. So now we're talking about 2063. Now we're talking about 2073. And because they see what's going on, they see African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans. They see, the story came out the other day about the birth rate being the lowest in 32 years. The whole deal with illegal immigration. All of this is really about how do we lock in place this power where we maintain control of the court system, we maintain control of the laws, and I'll throw in before you answer, even the gerrymandering case that's before the Supreme Court, which is why Kennedy was also huge, because he said there may be a legal reason for us to step in. If this Supreme Court allows gerrymandering, it will allow Republicans to draw these crazy lines to continue to maintain supermajorities in Florida, in North Carolina, in Alabama, in Mississippi. We can go down the line. That's really what's happening here.
Without a doubt. It's about power and it's about hypocrisy. All we got to do is look at South Africa and how people stayed in power for hundreds of years by making sure that they addressed the infrastructure, made sure that they controlled the judges, controlled the legislature. All these various things were in place so that they could control, even when the numbers were, they were in the minority, they still were in the majority of the control that happened in that space. When I talk about the hypocrisy of this, it's interesting that people want to legislate women's wombs, but they don't want to legislate the fossil fuel industries that are causing miscarriages by women. They don't want to legislate the assault rifle companies and everything that's going on in the gun space. So that's the hypocrisy that goes in there.
Well, not only that, I have not seen any of these ardent pro-lifers in Flint. I have not seen any of them, Janice, demanding something happen to babies that are the way you have miscarriages, because of the water in Flint. See, this is where they're fraudulent. They're fraudulent because they are also not on the front lines. Where are the pro-lifers about the black woman who was killed by the cop in Baytown, Texas? See, this is why they are full of it about being pro-life. They are not pro-life because they do not care when a cop guns down somebody in Baytown, Texas. They don't care about Philando Castile. They don't care about it. So they're not actually pro-life.
No, they're not. And I think I want to pick up on the brother's point that they're also anti-majoritarian. Majority rule. One person, one vote. Those are the principles on which this system is supposedly built. But now you've got with voter suppression, with gerrymandering, and I would submit to you with campaign finance reform. Money is speech. As long as we have more money we can become oligarchs. And if you've got less money than I do, you've got less speech than I have and less freedom of expression.
Which is actually going back to the original intent of America for rich, white, male landowners to control the nation.
Hold on as long as we can by our fingernails if we have to.
That's right.
To power in this country. And that's why I think it's important for your show and every right-minded brother and sister like you to express how important it is that we participate in this system so that we can express ourselves through the appointment of judges may be the most important thing that a president does.
And again, for all the folks out there who are sitting here watching us right now, and let me also be clear, I am not saying you cannot be a person of faith who opposes abortion.
Mm-hmm.
I will respect your viewpoint if you say, like Benjamin Watson, the football player, he is absolutely against abortion. Fine, that's his opinion. My issue is when people in Alabama pass that law, and according to the CDC, Alabama is #1 in the nation with infant mortality rate.
Right.
See, so if you care about babies, Janice, Erica, Greg, Mustafa, then show me how you are addressing being #1 infant mortality.
They don't care about your babies.
Yeah.
Because we're not human beings. They don't care about poor white babies.
Right.
You know, this is the challenge. This is really what we're faced with. And we don't have to look any farther back than Reconstruction in this country. That was the last time this country attempted, at least a region of it, to build something beyond that white supremacist model that you mentioned at the beginning, Roland. These folks don't care because we're not human. It's about power, as Janice said. I mean, look at John Roberts in the First Amendment. So when you look at the First Amendment, that explains John Roberts' judicial philosophy towards something like Citizens United. Money is speech.
Money is speech.
However, there is no right to privacy written into the federal Constitution either. So when you look at Griswold versus Connecticut, when you look at Roe versus Wade, these are things that speaking to an inherent right that the judges have interpreted in the Constitution, speaking to a common humanity. Finally, America has never been a nation. There is no common culture. This is a state where people are fighting to avoid last place. This oligarchy is going to run until this thing breaks. And then when you see places like New York City and New York State, where now they're saying maybe we'll use public funds to help somebody terminate a pregnancy. Now you got the deepest principle, which is the one you just raised. I don't care what somebody else believes as long as my right to believe what I believe is protected. That's the fundamental right, and that's the thing they have no interest in a theocracy.
And what decisions does the state have the right to make on behalf of free individuals?
That's right.
Right.
That's the question.
That's the crux.
But for the folks who are watching, and let me read this here. My man Cleo is on our YouTube channel, and he tweeted this. Let me find his tweet. He said, "quote: They are not hypocrites. They are consistent and focused on a clear agenda."
Right. It's true.
The right has always understood how critically important Supreme Court is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which is why the moral majority came to power in the late 1970s, 1980s with Ronald Reagan. They understood that. For the people, again, who are at home, this is why also y'all got to learn y'all got to read. Here we go to my iPad. This is a book by Jack Bass. It is called Unlikely Heroes, a vivid account of the implementation of the Brown decision in the South by Southern federal judges committed to the rule of law. Now, everybody who's watching, let me just unpack this, and then I want y'all to respond. What you have to understand is that there were 2 Brown decisions. There was Brown 1 and Brown 2. Second, the Supreme Court said all deliberate speed, which actually meant slow as hell. They actually left it up to the lower courts to actually implement Brown versus Board of Education. Many of the legal procedures we have now, such as injunction, did not exist prior to Brown. That was literal law that was created by these federal judges. The Fifth Circuit, which covered Alabama, covered Texas, covered Mississippi, these were white Southern judges. White folks thought that these white men were going to uphold racism. In fact, they didn't. They upheld the law. They were ostracized kicked out of country clubs and others.
Run out of time.
And the judge said, fine, to one of the wives. She's like, what are we going to do? He said, we just going to be by ourselves, because he understood the rule of law. If you don't understand all these conservative think tanks, I need you to understand that conservative think tanks came out of the Black Freedom Movement. As a result of Brown 1, Brown 2, then those legal decisions, everything began to change. Now, some of you may begin to say, well, Roland, I don't understand, because I can recall folks like William F. Buckley, how Republicans were all about supporting civil rights. You're absolutely right. Until this book came out. Here we go to my iPad. Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater.
That's right.
It is this book, Barry Goldwater, opposing the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that completely flipped Republicans, who then became the biggest critics of civil rights. Who did they hate the most? The courts. Because what Thurgood Marshall, what those lawyers with NAACP Legal Defense Fund understood is that the federal law is the law. So when you hear conservatives today talk about activist judges, they're actually talking about the judges who implemented Brown versus Board of Education, the judges who implemented civil rights law. They're talking about the late Damon Keith. They're talking about Constance Baker Motley. They're talking about Leon Higginbotham. They're talking about Thurgood Marshall.
That's right.
And so, to understand what's happening now, and the reason the Heritage Foundation, which is not far from here, even though it's led by a black woman, Kate James, and Kate Cole James is great, all of these institutions were born out of white power being torn down because of civil rights laws. These foundations, all of a sudden, Cato Institute, Heritage, and others, the Mellon family out of Pittsburgh, funded by millions of dollars these right-wing institutions. Federalist Society was specifically created to take young, white, legal minds, largely white men, train them into their thinking, move them through Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, Princeton, and flood the system. Reagan comes in 1980, appoints all these conservative judges. They then bring them into the system, appoint them as clerks. So, to Janice's point, when Kennedy retires, he waits in time for his law clerk, Kavanaugh, to be appointed to take his place.
Right. Who went to the same prep school as Gorsuch. These guys, oh, come on.
So what we are dealing with, folks, is a system that came into existence 50 plus years ago. So what we're seeing today is the manifestation of a very clear, well-funded agenda, because they said we are not going to allow what those damn judges did for those black folks. In the Black Freedom Movement, we are not going to allow that unfettered access ever again.
Absolutely, and the way that you laid that out, that is a mature adult situation. So the reactionary that's coming out.
You ain't gonna get that on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, but go ahead.
At all, which is why it's important to support Roland Unfiltered.
That's right.
Because black media definitely matters. So this is a full matured adult. So the reactionary action that we're seeing coming out of the Democratic Party of people that are alarmed or they're really upset, what you're providing now, the education that you're providing, the reactionary needs to become, okay, so then what are we going to do to combat this? The yelling, the screaming, it's not going to help, because this is something that has been set and been in motion for several decades. So I think that it's critical even at this time that everybody look at what we're actually facing and then plan long-term actually battle.
And Mustafa, I have these battles with people. First of all, I've never in my life identified as a Democrat or Republican. Mm-hmm. But I do know how to pay attention. Mm-hmm. And when I have these people go, Roland, you out here telling people to vote Democrat, no, what I'm saying is vote your future. Mm-hmm. Which means you better decide who is more likely to appoint people who are more like to think like me, because these federal judges will be determining whether it's a class action lawsuit or not. These federal judges will be determining whether or not we actually take over, like what took place in Texas when it came to a federal judge took over the Texas prison system. Yep. See, that's why all these people who are running around here who are hollering, yes, and I'm going to say this, Tangibles 2020, who are hollering ADOS, I need y'all to think a hell of a lot deeper, because to say, oh, even if we got to deal with Trump 4 more years, the president can only serve a maximum of 8 years, right, but they are appointing people who might be there 40 and 50 years. Mm-hmm. And what you need to understand watching is that current Supreme Court justices, when they are writing their rulings, literally are using cases even when they were in the dissent for more than 100 years ago. Right. So a judge who's appointed in 2019 could have the actual effect on a law in 2119, mm-hmm, and folks are acting like what's happening present day don't matter.
Yeah, I mean, as everybody has said, it's all about understanding the power that exists inside of your vote when you don't get engaged in the process, how it plays out for literally decades and decades. But here's the other part that plays into this. These same individuals, when I worked on Capitol Hill, they are the same folks who will also end up being chiefs of staff, who help to frame what the laws are going to look like, and then the interpretation of those laws goes to the courts. So there's a 1-2 that's going on there. So we have got to understand this game. This is 3-dimensional chess that's going on, and we've got to get engaged in this process and help to actually sort of change things out.
And progressive and Democrats on this, Janice, do not take the courts as seriously as the right.
No, they don't. I would like to offer, though, just a smidgen of optimism.
Go ahead.
And it's from a point that you made, Roland, about the fact that a lot of this extreme right-wing so-called conservatism, I like to ask them what you conserving, but that conservatism really comes as a reaction to the freedom movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Sure. They went, you talk about with all deliberate speed, from 1954 when the decision came down, it was 1967, 68 before schools started to be desegregated in the South. Mm-hmm. It was called massive resistance. That's right. Massive resistance to what? Burgeoning Black Power movement that really started in the 1940s with African-American soldiers coming home from Europe saying, I ain't gonna be treated like no boy.
Precisely. Well, there were actual gun battles in train stations between black soldiers and white soldiers.
And so despite the fact that there's superior military resources, superior financial resources, we have been able to fight back and win against this juggernaut. And when we awaken unto ourselves, I predict that we will do that again.
So the folks, Greg, before I go to you, before I go to my next story. So for the folks who are watching, I need you to understand when you talked about how they're playing chess. Mm-hmm. If Republicans are able to get the Supreme Court to validate and rule constitutional gerrymandering, that means it will then go across the state. So it was ruled unconstitutional in Pennsylvania. The Wisconsin case went to the courts. They kicked it back. You got the one in North Carolina. You got the one district in Maryland. You got what's happening in Texas. You have it happening around the country. So here's what happens. If the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court, says we're going to declare gerrymandering to be constitutional, that means every state where Republicans control the legislature and the governor's mansion, they're going to redraw the districts to guarantee they stay in power, which means your state might vote 60% Democrat, but the Republicans will still maintain the control of the seats because they redraw the seats. Now, why does that matter? Because if they gerrymander the legislature, which guarantees them a majority or a supermajority, that means they don't even talk to Democrats. That means they can pass any law they have, whatever they want to do, which now means that if they control the federal bench, then the law that they pass, when you get sued by the ACLU or Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law or LDF, then you got a conservative who's sitting there saying, no, I'm going to throw your lawsuit out. So what they are trying to do is literally lock up state legislature, governor's mansions, federal courts, and control of the Senate. Republicans weren't tripping on losing the House. No. They were fine losing the House. It's the Senate. Yep. That's why all y'all white boys who are running for president, go sit your ass down and go run for the U.S. Senate.
Run for Senate.
The fool who's running out of Montana, you're not going to be president, but he could be the senator from Montana. The guy in Colorado can be the senator in Colorado. If Democrats do not take over the Senate, you can't change the judges.
That's right.
And that's the game, Greg.
You're right. I mean, Roland, I think the one difference we have now that we didn't have before, I'm talking about from the beginning of the Republic when you see a tiny black elite begin to petition the courts. I'm talking about the Civil War period when the black abolitionists and the whites began to push. I'm talking about Reconstruction where they leaned on the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. I'm talking about the second Reconstruction where they leaned on Section 2 of Article 2 of those amendments to get empowering legislation. The difference between all those moments and now, these people have abandoned the rule of law as a principle.
Yes.
So you're not talking about geniuses like Pauli Murray, or you name Constance Baker Motley, or Spotswood Robinson at the Fourth Circuit, and Earl Warren and others who say there's a constitutional framework that we must respect. Earl Tuttle out of Georgia, white